Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Linux Saloon. I am not Nate. My name is Michael. Nate could not be here with us this week, so I am stepping in to help out. And also with me helping out is Eric and Eris. Thank you very much. And Steve also is I think he's here, but he was having some connection issues, so we're going to be working on that in the meantime. But we have a exciting show. Welcome. We have an exciting show to talk about. We're going to talk about Peppermint OS. We're also got some news to discuss this week that we're going to muddle through the Linux news. I like that. But first of all, we're going to start with I forgot how he phrased it. Free pour. That's what it was. Free pour. So is anybody doing? If there's something cool that anybody would like to talk about what they're doing with this week with tech, Linuxy related stuff? Maybe you're trying out some different software or something like that. Feel free to let us know what you've been doing. I have not prepared pretty much at all because I had very little time up front to get this ready. So I spent the entire countdown, well, not the 30 seconds, the other part of the countdown, for about 30 minutes trying to figure out how to set up the OBS. I figured it out. Professional. So...
You know what? It's okay. That's the fun of live streaming, right? It's real.
Exactly.
It's raw. Everything's just happening in the moment. So we're fine. We're here. We're all here together.
It's fine. It works.
Yeah, it's fine. So, and nobody's done anything interesting with Linux this week. I find that hard to believe.
Really?
I might have done something.
What'd you do?
What's that?
So other than destroying my personal laptop's install by screwing up my BTRFS system snapshots, because that's fine. I may have replaced my root with a snapshot that was broken. It's fine. Not a big deal. But I am it's cool. I switched back to Android, which feels weird, but I'm loving it. And the reason is because I use SyncThing typically to take all of my photos and immediately dump them to a server at my house. So I did that, and now I have set up the server, which has a RAID 5 array. Yes, it's BTRFS. Don't judge me. And that sends snapshots directly to an archival, like an actual large archival server that's got I think it's 30 terabytes or something.
Oh, nice.
That's offsite, and I'm using BTRFS send and receive to send full file system incremental snapshots to another location.
Wow.
It's so much fun.
That's crazy. Now, how hard was that to set up? I mean, what did you have to do? Was there
It was a
keys
lot.
involved?
It was a lot. That's a nice understatement.
So I'm assuming it's some sort of secure communication. Is it an SSH or
FS?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. I'm not sure how secure it is. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to SSH at all. And I sort of maybe figured out the BTRFS send receive thing as I was doing it and have not. It's very hacky, but currently it works.
That is interesting because the send receive for Butterfest is awesome. Like the way you can basically have a system where you've built everything on a particular. You ever had a situation where you install a distribution and you have it set up perfectly how you want it, but then you run out of space? I mean, I've experienced this 100 times. But then you also you want to get a new drive, but you don't want to rebuild everything. With Butterfs, you can do the send receive thing, and you can actually take all of the content from one Butterfs drive to another, and then expand out the drive, like the existing partition subvolumes, into the rest of the drive, and effectively have your still pre-existing entire setup without actually losing anything on a brand new drive. Butterfs is awesome.
Wow.
It is so good at that, and you could do it per subvolume. So you can even just send your home volume instead of your whole system volume, or either or. It's super crazy.
If you set it up right, you can use Butterfs to have multiple boots and all use the same home folder or in the home subfolder, and you can basically have all of them independent so they don't actually fight with each other as you would normally do with a regular partition.
So this is a good question, and it's actually something I've been wondering. I haven't done the homework myself, but IT Ico or IT Echo, I'm not sure how you say that, but in the YouTube chat had asked, how is ButterFS compared to ZFS on Linux? And I know they both do snapshots, but is there any appreciable difference between the two?
Massive differences. Yeah.
Okay.
Like so the difference between mostly is that people should not compare those two things because they're made for two different things. Now,
Okay.
ButterFS can do storage, be used for storage and for a high capacity storage. ZFS is built specifically for high capacity storage and not meant to be used on your system as an operating system structure. So you shouldn't be using it for the file system of your operating system. That's just not a good idea. There's a lot of reasons for that. The biggest reason, in my opinion, is the inability to shrink the pool size of the ZFS pool. So if you can always make it larger and add more drives, but you can never make it lower, otherwise you break it. Whereas ButterFS is way more flexible. Now, it's not necessary. Like if you're arguing about which one's better for storage, then there's a whole other debate there. And I think that you could say that ButterFS has its own merits, and you could say that ZFS has its own merits. But ButterFS has the benefit of most production, like consumer grade NAS that you go out and buy are powered by ButterFS. The vast majority of them are, like Synology and Netgear. They're all using ButterFS. But in terms of operating systems, ButterFS is clearly the better option because it can do all the things that you would need for a modern copy-on-write file system to do, and it can do them quite well, provided it is properly set up in the first place. If you don't know what you're doing and you manually set up ButterFS, you can easily break your system and create some weird artifacts and
Shickle's nodding.
Yeah. I may have done that a few times.
And this comes to like one of my major problems with Ubuntu is that they actually with a desktop operating system, they provide ZFS as an option, and a lot of people should not be doing that because I've heard a lot of people breaking their systems because they're selecting ZFS instead of BetterFS.
Dan, is this something you work with? You work with both of them, or?
Well, our flavor uses calamari, so we don't have ZFS because it's not like when I think it is built in now, but it wasn't when we implemented that anyway. So we do test ButterFS installs. They're manual still. You still have to do it manually because ext4 is sort of default, but so we do some testing there. One thing, because ZFS requires DKMS modules, sometimes those sort of botch up on you. So that's where you run into the problems, is when you have a updated kernel and things don't go in the right order, and then it won't boot. Yeah. So so that's the way it works in Ubuntu. I did have a question for Shickle. How often are you sending your ButterFS stuff to your archival place?
Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
So, okay, that's cool. So yeah, nice. That's a good setup.
Hopefully, chaos doesn't strike on a Tuesday. Just gotta fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, probably for your home use, that's probably just fine.
Nice. And it looks like Gorodonu also said that ButterFS doesn't need ECC RAM, where ZFS it's highly recommended. So sounds like maybe there's just some more requirements. Yeah, I'd like to see. I mean, ButterFS, I've been testing it more and more lately, and it just seems like a no-brainer. It's so easy to deal with, snapshots before you install software, backups of file systems. Like it has all of these capabilities that seem to make all of the dangerous parts of computing, right? The fact that you could lose data and things like that. It just seems to fix a lot of those, I guess. So, and I know for the longest time it was a matter of, well, ButterFS isn't ready for production use, and and I don't know really where that was coming from, and maybe there was at some point in time.
I think it's because there's this problem that happens with Linux in general. It happens, but also just in technology, where people have one experience that happens to be bad, and they just forever sign it off and say, "Oh, you can't ever use this; it's not good." So years and years ago, if you go back 10 years ago, ButterFS was not ready. And so people would try it, and then it would
Lose
create
data.
lose
Yeah.
data, create some big issues, and then they would swear it off forever. But it's been totally usable for at least 5 years, and it's been the sole option for OpenSUSE for at least 2 or 3 years. I mean, they used to do it where it was a ButterFS combination with XFS, and now they do it with just ButterFS by default. And Fedora introduced it as well. And you start seeing more and more distributions introduce ButterFS because it's been ready for a while, but people weren't trying it because they had those bad experiences. And also there's another factor of having a bad experience from people installing it and not knowing how to properly install it. You know, you could have a terrible experience because you didn't know how to build it out and when I first did ButterFS, I built it very badly and it was terrible and I broke a bunch of stuff. So I tried it a bunch of times, and I was just going back to see what it was like. And then I went back, and then I tried it on Fedora and OpenSUSE, and the experience is drastically different, especially with the Fedora one latestly, because it does it differently than OpenSUSE. But I like the way that Fedora does it. However, Fedora doesn't have snapshots, so I wish there was those. But that would be nice. Either way, ButterFS has grown so far so fast in the past 3 years that when people who are now currently saying that ButterFS is not usable, it's just because they haven't used it in that many years, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, I'll just say I'm kind of old school. All my computers run ext4 still. I've never used it. However, with new people, I always suggest ext4 as well, just because of those reasons. It's hard to set up.
It's not hard to set up. You just use a
as-
distro that has it already.
I agree with the standpoint of having to do it manually, but whenever you see distributions building it in, like Linux Mint, for example, you know, they have, if you are using ButterFS, whenever you install new software, it's going to do a snapshot and do a ButterFS snapshot, which is obviously a much faster, cleaner type of a snapshot. And so when it's built into the system, then it doesn't really matter to the end user, right? It's when you have to do it manually, and then you have to manage the snapshots, and you have to manage it. That I agree, Penguin, is this. That's not a good experience for the end user.
For sure, no one should do it manually. If you unless you're really into file systems and you want to know how to do it manually, then sure. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And if you're new to Linux or new to just using, new to computers in general, you shouldn't be touching that level stuff anyway. Regardless of whether it's ext4 or ButterFS or XFS or whatever, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't even bother with that stuff because that's such a low level thing to even worry about. That just use whatever your distro does by default.
I think that's
here's the reason why I just suggest new users just use ext4 is just to avoid all those problems in case it's not built into the operating system. Because I know someone who did that once and it wasn't built in, and then all of a sudden they got this unusable system, and now they'll never use Linux ever again.
Well, I mean, new users really shouldn't even be. That question should never even be presented to them. Like, regardless, they shouldn't even know what Extended 4 is. They shouldn't know what ButterFS is. They shouldn't have to bother with that at all, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's absolutely true, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you said rightly so that over the last couple of years, you've seen more traction with ButterFS, and that traction comes when the distributions themselves decide to implement it in a way that incorporates it into the user experience, where they don't have to. You could have used ButterFS. Like you said, 10 years ago, you had to do it manually and you had to manage it manually, and it was a terrible experience. And that's why nobody did it. Yeah. But everybody, not everybody, but, folks are now doing it because it is part of the operating system. Why wouldn't you if it's that easy to use and it has all these benefits, right?
Oh, yeah. It's super easy to use for, Fedora. There's also Fedora, OpenSUSE, and I think a bunch of Arch derivatives like Garuda have it. And there's more and more are adopting ButterFS, which is awesome to see, because this is why I like to know about the underlying core stuff. Like, I want to know about Pipewire and ButterFS to see, those things that are like, what are the best options? And when you start seeing the distributions deploy those things, it's very exciting. Like, for example, OpenMindriva this week released a new version saying that they were switching to Pipewire. That's another one of those things that most people should have no reason to know what these things are. Right. But it's very exciting for people who do know what it is, because it offers so much power and benefit in the same way that ButterFS offers to the file system, Pipewire offers to the audio servers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was great. I'm glad we talked about Butterfest because I think it is something that we will see, or we're already seeing, and we'll continue to see more and more of, and that's excellent. But we do want to move forward a little bit here and jump into the Act 2. What does Nate call this one? I don't even.
I think he just calls it Act 2. Yeah, just Act 2.
All right. Yep. It's not a. There's no.
Distro exploration. I think that's what it is.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was some drinking term we were supposed to be using.
We're gonna have to come up with one. We're gonna after the show. We're gonna have to brainstorm, figure out what we're gonna call this. The main topic needs to have something like this.
Oh goodness.
I don't know.
There's probably a brewery term for it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have to come up with
the
something.
entree, the main entree, something.
Aperitif. No, that's the beginning.
All right, so we're gonna be talking about Peppermint OS in this latest release. How many people here had a chance to try out Peppermint OS?
I took a stab at it, but didn't get too far.
Okay, so basically everybody here is prepared to talk about it, so that's great. So let's go ahead and start talking about it. We have a straw poll that's also released on the forums, I think it was on the Telegram group. I'm not sure. Anyway, we're going to talk about the latest release of Peppermint OS. There's a lot of changes in this latest version. And I think the Peppermint OS dropped the number releases, so now it's just Peppermint OS, not 11.
Correct.
Okay. So we're talking about specifically Peppermint OS. You might, when you go to the website, you might still see the link of 10, which is a different version. But we're talking about the one that is Debian based, XFCE based, and also there's been a ton of changes. So let's start it off. How about Eric? Let's talk about what was your experience with getting started with Peppermint OS with this latest version?
I think we're all pretty used to the Calamares installer at this point. It's become very familiar. So getting into the desktop session and then having that be, the installer felt very familiar and comfortable. Going through the install process, again, it's Calamares, you're just used to those steps are pretty universal. And you can tell that this is their first release. There's a couple little rough edges. I noticed a couple things with for me at least, and maybe this was just my system, but the partitioning screen, you had to sort of find the radio button. You can't kind of see, there's no contrast on the screen. So it's just a little graphical thing, UI thing that needs to be cleaned up. And it's there, I know where it is. So I was able to find it just by clicking for it. But yeah, I think it's a smart idea on their part to use something that is, so universally used, tested, and understood, by a large percentage of people who use Linux now. So the install process was fine. Yeah, I had no issues whatsoever. Yeah. So I don't know if did anyone actually have any specific problems with installing? I guess is a better way to say it. Penguin, go ahead.
Well, I think mine was just system specific because I was installing it on a Chromebook. But the Chromebook was, a very, very interesting experience because it didn't find the internal storage.
That could be something.
It just in case it does help, I've seen this before. It's possible that it's an eMMC drive and it might be getting auto-mounted as an SD card. You'll have to manually unmount that before you can proceed through the installer.
Yeah, I figured that out. Yeah.
The only problem I was having is that there wasn't a screen reader available by default, so I'm trying to figure out how to connect with a virtual or to the serial console of the VM and install it that way. If I can.
Got it. Yeah.
The only issue that I came across is I went through the installer. It was really easy and simple, and I put it on real hardware. When you got to the end of the installer, you had down at the bottom, you still had a next button instead of done. It took me a minute. I'm sitting there clicking on next, next, nothing's happening.
Yeah.
They need to take that out at the end and just have done. It's like they put a back door in there and there's nothing hooked to it.
And Endeavor had that same thing for the longest time, and it used to throw me off too, because I'd be like, there is no next. I'm done.
Yeah, the done button is just slightly highlighted more than the other two, which is they do know about that.
Yeah, you got to look over to the left, and then it says finished and highlighted.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Were people able to install it in EFI?
Good question.
Well, that's a good.
Computer's too
that's
old.
a good.
With mine, I tried to leave my laptop in EFI after having just run PopOS on EFI, and it wouldn't boot off the USB in that way. So I had to switch it back to legacy. I was wondering if it was just my hardware somehow not working with Peppermint.
I had the same issue on my EFI, and I think it's just BIOS only.
I booted mine in EFI, installed it in EFI, but it wouldn't start. It just said there's no system there. So I had to change it to legacy. So everything worked. It just wouldn't recognize that it was installed. But I do have a problem with the EFI and that Toshiba. It's always been an issue. So I'd have to think it's hardware in that case. Because it works EFI, no problem, on VirtualBox. Don't have any issues there.
Mm.
Yeah, I know in the early testing phase, I did it on my main PC because it's EFI and I have an IC dock. And the early version had no problem installing EFI. I haven't installed it since on the main system.
The problem is I wouldn't know how to dig into it to try and feed back to them. So we'll see.
Here's the issue. There is no EFI in the grub menu anywhere in this. On Debian 11, which this is completely copied by, the Debian 11 does have a boot EFI in the grub menu.
Okay. Dan, did you have something?
Yeah, so I noticed some weirdness with EFI 2. It wouldn't install in QEMU, but it did in VirtualBox. So that was, or it wouldn't even boot. Like it booted up and you were able to select it, but you get a black screen. So that was kind of strange. But I was able to do it in VirtualBox in EFI mode. And then I did a manual partitioning because I got one little gripe with the way they have their install set up. And that is that they had a large swap, like a Hibernate swap as default. Mm-hmm. And so I had given my VM, like 4 gig of RAM. And so it wanted to use 8 gig of, my 20 gig testing partition. It wanted to use 8 gig of that for swap. And obviously I don't need that for a VM. Right. So, I did it manually and, I'm not sure. I know they're running a little bit older version of Calamares because it's what's in the Debian repos. But I think it was available then to be able to select different types of swap, whether you wanted a file, a small partition, or a large partition. And so that's just something that they'll probably want to catch on the next release, whenever that is. It's a small little thing, but it's something that it really chews up a lot of your disk space if you don't need that much swap.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
They could also consider doing a swap file instead of doing a swap partition.
Yeah, that swap file is nice actually, because
I would prefer that. A lot of distros are moving to swap file, and I think that's the best approach, especially for this kind of situation where they don't know what is necessary for the particular system. And with a swap file, you don't have to.
Right.
Go ahead, Guru. Oh, sorry.
Wow. Just one more little thing. We
Dan,
enabled that in Ubuntu. We got the drop down thing. So it defaults to swap file, but you can also pick none. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, I installed in a cloud hoster, Vulture, and I didn't have any problems with that.
Rick, you want to say something?
Yep.
Yeah. I installed it on my laptop over here, which is UEFI. Didn't have any trouble with that. I also installed it in my son's gaming laptop out in there, and I also installed manually. First time I read this, but installed manually the NVIDIA driver, since the generic one didn't work very well with it. So anyway, and it's so far they work pretty good overall. But I did notice the thing Dan mentioned about the swap file issue, and because I installed on VM with 4 gigs of RAM memory. Mm-hmm. Wanted to put an 8 gig. The only way I could work around that was to go through the manual partitioning.
Got it. Well, and again, keep in mind this release, like Michael said, I mean, they changed a lot of different stuff. So a new installer, they're using a different desktop environment. There is a lot of stuff going on here. So when you think about the totality of everything they were trying to accomplish and the just the sheer effort it takes to get through all that stuff, honestly, I think it's pretty impressive, like that it is as clean and well functioning as it is. So, but these are all the types of things that hopefully by us bringing these up and by, the rest of their user base sort of contributing this type of feedback, that they can then, improve this. And then the next release only gets better from there. So,
yeah. The goal of the show is just to kind of check out all the things that exist in the distribution to kind of offer criticism that is for the pure purpose of constructiveness. If we're going to be critical of it, because we're not trying to bash the developers of it. We want to help them make a better distribution, and that's why we cover it in the way we do. So I think there are some really cool things that they are doing. But I do think that the switch to XFCE makes sense. Although I saw some complaints about people not liking the switch because of a larger overhead of the resources. Because Peppermint was used for like lightweight distributions because it was based on LXDE. And I think that it's a good decision to go to XFCE because LXDE is effectively no longer existing. Like it's sort of maintained a little bit, but not really. And I think it's safer to have either at least Mate or XFCE, one of those two, or maybe even going to LXQt. But sticking to LXDE would have been not a good idea. So I'm glad to see that they did that switch.
Well, I when I was running Peppermint OS, I noticed it was by default using about 1.2 gigs of RAM, which is rather heavy for an XFCE desktop.
Not really anymore. XFCE has grown a lot. Like it's pretty much doubled its resource usage that it needs. A lot of people look at XFCE being like this super lightweight desktop environment, but that was when it was GTK2 based. And as soon as they went to GTK3, it essentially doubled the amount it needs.
So one of the things,
I think you'll find the problem with that is the icon cache. They put up on their website that there was a problem with the icon cache using up RAM. So there's a little command that you run that reduces the RAM usage. I don't know if that sticks or whether you got to do it every time you start. I'm not quite sure about that.
So I wanted to mention two things before installation. So I kind of lost my place, but I wanted to talk about the hash, the SHA-512. So I appreciated that they went 512 and not 256, and I think all the other districts should follow that. And I also hope that they do a torrent link next time for the next release whenever they can, because I prefer a torrent versus just direct download because it has the checksum built in at least.
This thing is running 650 megabytes of RAM currently, just sitting here idling.
Yeah, so maybe that is it. Maybe it's the icon cache or something like that.
Yeah, Dan, that sounds a little bit more normal for XFCE than 1.3 gigs, something like that.
It goes up over a gig. It goes like up to 1.2 if you open Firefox.
Right. Yeah, which you'd expect. I mean, the browsers are big applications.
They're effectively open operating systems now.
It's basically, yeah, I know. So I wanted to step back just real quick. What we've been doing is just giving a little bit of like a background. So what is the impetus, like why was Peppermint created in the first place, and where is it now? Where is it heading? I have some basic copy on this just that I could read. The concept of Peppermint was to create a web-centric operating system that was easy and intuitive to use with the LXDE GUI, proving popular with users and its lightweight footprint, not consuming unnecessary resources to increase your workflow. So that was sort of like the beginning of it. And, a couple of the things that they've done that were sort of innovative were the ICE or the ICE, where you can create encapsulated web applications essentially that run as desktop application.
Yes. One of my favorite things about Peppermint for years, I asked multiple times for multiple different developers, like, can we make it distro agnostic, let everybody have it? And they said, well, it's open source, so anybody can take it. But it's still a Peppermint thing. So fair enough. But yeah,
Yeah.
ICE is one of the key things to even think about. Considering Peppermint, it's such a unique value to Peppermint. I mean, there are other distributions that are now copying that approach, but it's been there for like, I don't know, 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, and you're right. I have seen other distributions now start to include that type of thing, and there are other projects out there that provide a similar type of service or encapsulation. But I think ICE is so well polished at this point because, like you're saying, it's been around for so long. But it's no secret Steve is our resident Peppermint expert, and so Steve, what would you say in terms of the elevator pitch for Peppermint? Like, what is it that you consider to be the guiding principles, the strengths of it? Like, why would someone be interested in Peppermint?
Well, when I first got into Linux, I was trying to find something that worked on a Asus netbook, EEC 1005, and I looked up, of course, lightweight distributions and what worked, and I tried Peppermint 5 because that's about the time I came in. Peppermint 5. I forget what version of Linux Lite was out and all that, and I kept going back to Peppermint. And there was just something about it, especially when they finally had switched to version 6. And that's when Mark had fully taken over and he started making some different changes to it. And I going from PCI-Man FM to Nemo, and the theming greatly changed in that. And mainly, I'll be honest, one of the reasons why I really stuck with it was because of the people and Mark in the forum. I felt welcome, and they were ready to answer questions, and I had not ever experienced anything like that in all my years of Windows because I never really looked for it, but it was something different in that, and it just made me keep with it, and then it kept getting better and better and better. The underlying principle, as Mark would say, everything you need and everything you don't. That's the philosophy of Peppermint. It's very lightweight. You make the decision what you want to install. ICE was the big factor in a lot of things, that you can make all these web applications to install your music player of choice and things like that. If you wanted to use Microsoft Office, the web apps, you were able to set up an ICE that way and use Microsoft on Linux, and one of the things that I think is sometimes forgotten, because a lot of times, definitely right now it's being compared to Peppermint 10. Well, that was 10 years in the making, right? It took 10 years to make Peppermint 10 what it was, and it was a combination of some good stuff. Now, a new team has taken over. They've gone in a little bit of different direction, but still the same principle. Keeping it lightweight. That we had very strong setup when they were putting this together. This is what we needed. This is what we wanted. And it will take a little bit. There are, some rough spots in that, but, being a little bit behind the scene, I get to see what the team is doing and how enthusiastic they are to really improve this and move on to the next phase. And some of they just reposted a new ISO on Friday, and I had just installed it before the stream. Talk about RAM, it's sitting at 573 on a Asus gamer laptop. For those that are really interested in the RAM. It's what I think the underlying principle of Peppermint, because going back to the early Windows days, you didn't have much that came with it, and you had to go find your stuff. So I think maybe people might have been used to that, and it wasn't until Windows 10 that you had a store that you can go to. But the early days and through, I think, Windows 7, you had to find your software.
So I just have one more quick thing that I think is interesting about Peppermint, and then we'll get into the other people's experience with it. So a lot of distributions ship with different desktop environment options. So that, they'll offer, 3 or 4 different, more popular desktop environments. And I find it, I'm sure it's by necessity and by design, but Peppermint has, their one desktop, and they have one way of doing this and one way of doing that. And they're able to then focus their resources on, this one thing instead of being, sort of scattered and going in different directions. And I've always, Peppermint to me, so Peppermint 10 and previous, when I started it up, it was always a little bit of a head scratcher because it was so different, right? You had different components of different desktop environments sort of mixed together, like you're saying, file manager from one, and and it took the best ideas from different places and sort of put them together in a very unique and interesting way, and then couple that with all of the great artwork that they've always had, and it was just a very standout sort of distribution to me based on those types of things. So I'm really happy to see that the legacy is going to continue and that they're rebasing and doing what they need to do to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that talk about the different desktops in the forum. People are throwing different desktops on it, and because it's now pretty much straight up Debian XFCE, you're not going to break anything that the hybrid had in there. Some things wouldn't work right in that, and one of the forum members put OpenBox on it, and I forget another one what was going to do, and so they're trying it, and it's working because it doesn't have that hybrid LXDE XFCE, and it's you're not going to break anything.
Yeah. All these desktops are in the Debian repos. You can install Mate on it if you want.
Yeah, so that is, and that's what I'm saying. So I think rebasing on Debian makes a lot of sense because then that opens up possibilities that weren't there before. But so okay, sounds like we got through the installation okay for the most part. One of the things that I think might be a little controversial, the decision was made to not include a browser by default, but you have to choose one as part of your setting up the desktop. Did anyone have any thoughts on that? Do you consider a default browser a necessity? Do you think that's a weird decision on their part?
I think it's a necessity unless there's a very clear in-your-face decision as soon as you boot it up. Like the first time you boot it, that is the only thing that is there. It's a giant thing. What browser do you want? Maybe in that case. The way that this was that Peppermint OS did it was kind of weird because when you clicked install a browser, there was also a bunch of other things that were not browser related at all, like the ability to install Flatpaks and snaps and those sorts of things. That was kind of confusing. Like, it's good that you have those to make it easy to install certain features and stuff, but it wasn't clear that I was even going to be giving those as options when I clicked the install a web browser. So it was just kind of awkward. There needs to be more separation, better organization, and that sort of stuff. And also more details about what specific things these things are to people who are getting into using Peppermint. If they're not familiar with what they need to do with a Flatpak package setup, or installing GNOME software, because I saw an article talking about Peppermint OS saying that when they installed GNOME software, there was no data and there was nothing in the store and nothing like that. It required you to restart your machine and reboot to get GNOME software to work again. So once you did it, then all the stuff would there, all the data would be there and everything. But if you just installed it, tried to open it, there'd be nothing there because it didn't have anything cached from the repos. So like, if it was clear that that was necessary, it wouldn't have been as problematic I would assume, for that article.
Gotcha. Shickle, what were your thoughts?
I was gonna say that like having a default browser is kind of cool. Like, but I think just people are so different with browsers that having that sort of having that presentation is probably, I think, personally better than having one pre-installed. Because I mean, there's the old trope, like people use Internet Explorer to download Chrome, and people use this to download that. So like everybody's going to be doing something with it, and if you just have a box that's like, just get exactly what you need, I think that's a better solution personally. And I think it also saves space on the ISO, so I think that's good.
Dan Simmons. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
I totally get the philosophy of it asking you to choose a browser. I get that because people have different choices. But I was chatting to a friend yesterday who actually runs a tech show, and he was asking me about how he used Peppermint in the past, and he said it was a great live CD or live USB. That's kind of broken now, because it means that when you use live mode, you have to install a browser every single time.
That's a fair point. It really is, and I agree with that. And I also agree with Michael's, assertion that if you're going to take that path, it needs to be something that's like thrown in your face. Not, and again, all of this, the big caveat here is first release of this new sort of reworking of all these things. So, this is all just intended to be feedback for future releases. But so Dan, go ahead, Dan Simmons.
Yeah, I was gonna, great minds think alike here, because I was just going to say something similar to what Peter did. I mean, you need something probably on the live ISO. There's so many things like documentation and whatnot that are on the web that you might need when you're installing, or you just whatever, right? Yeah. So having it on the live ISO, you need something. But the other thing is, I think this highlights some of the issue with the Debian base. There just isn't a lot of great browser choices with straight Debian. And so you're forced into a situation where you've got Firefox ESR probably, or a really outdated Chromium, and then everything else just kind of falls behind that even. So it's a tough one. I can understand how they landed on not being able to make a decision, because there isn't a great one to make.
That's true.
Yeah. Go ahead, Penguin.
Well, okay. I don't really care as far as I am whether a browser's installed. I can get one. But there are a couple issues with the browsers I saw. And one of them is they're from the Debian repos. And this isn't a Peppermint problem. This is a Debian problem. The current version of Firefox ESR that's installed is 76X. And that has been out of support for over 2 months.
Penguin, that's been changed.
Yeah, that's been fixed. It's you'll get 91 now.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 91.
you get 91.6.
Yeah, because I think they just pushed that when I emailed the Debian team.
And a lot of that was because of the way that they originally had, when they had it set up before they released that first ISO, it was 91.6, and then Debian changed where it was in the repo. And next thing you know, they got 78.
Yeah,
so
that was a huge problem. But still, Chromium is still version 90, and that's all over a month and a half old. So Debian, I think, needs to do a little bit better in keeping that up to date. But also,
honestly, I don't think just to be just sorry to interrupt, but I don't think Debian really wants to keep those up to date, because the vast majority of people who are Debian users, they've always said stuff like, we just get the tarball, or we do some other kind of bypass to not worry about using the repo version. So like there was a lot of people not even bothered by the fact that they was so old, because they didn't use it anyway.
Me, I just pulled it down from the unstable repo, but to me, that's just a huge security hole. But
for sure.
Also, I kind of agreed with you all about it being in your face and all that stuff, because you can get confused by how many software options there were when you went to go install a browser. Then you had all sorts of unrelated stuff right there as well. I think what they should probably do is create a guided step, like a wizard type thing, where you go through and say, this is where you start. First, you install a web browser, then you install, like, let's say, an Office suite, and go step by step through that. I think that would be the best way to handle that.
Dan Kelly?
Like Penguin said, if you're feeling really, really lucky and gutsy, there is in the unstable a Firefox 96.0.3-1. I did install it on my first install of Peppermint before we got the new one last night. And it worked fine. But I prefer to actually just go to the Firefox website, get the all-in-one bz.tar package, unpack it, make my own desktop file, and it becomes part of the system when you implant that.
Yeah, that's the typical way that Debian users do it.
Yeah, that's how I've been doing it ever since I've been using Debian, because like you said, there isn't a lot of options with Debian for web browsers that they support in their repos.
Yeah,
but
they don't, and that's true. I mean, and that's one of the problems that people have always brought up with Debian is that the fact that the software choices.
There's two reasons why I do this like this is because I have my home directory. My home partition is different from all the other partitions. So I can wipe out everything in the machine except my home partition and put a whole new operating system in it. Firefox is intact with the history, bookmarks, and everything just as it was. Same thing with LibreWolf.
Right, because it saves all that under your config folder. Yeah, absolutely. Colin.
Yeah, I've got... I made my video yesterday for Peppermint.
Why don't you give us a link for it? We'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Sorry, go ahead.
My question, I tried not to make comparisons with Peppermint 10 and Peppermint 11. This is a new Peppermint moving forward, so I try to respect that. I think they've done a huge amount of work, I'd have to think, just rebasing on Debian alone. Now, there was, I know Ferron's got a browser install, and there's a couple of other distros that have a browser installer as well, which was on Peppermint 10. I don't know whether that works or not on Debian, but it would have been good for them to keep that in there. Maybe they plan on doing that because that's got a whole heap of browsers and a whole heap of different options. Because I would have thought that they would have had a couple of things like maybe Vivaldi, Google Chrome on offer as well in that browser, on the browser install. And yes, and one of my things I did mention on my video is that browser install should be browsers only, because that whole selection, packages selection, is on offer under the software platform. So that install browsers should be just browsers alone. And they did have a good little tool to do that. Maybe they just haven't got around to it, but Steve might know something about that. But
when Dave started the development, I brought that up, and there was a lot of going back and forth about what they wanted to do with the browser. They keep bringing up every time that Mark came out with another version or a respin, he'd flip from Chromium to Firefox, back to Chromium, back to Firefox. And, you'd either get, people all ticked off because it went from Firefox to Chromium or vice versa. And that Vince actually made a nice suggestion in the forum, which the lead developer seemed to like. And we'll see if that happens. I know Penguin got something to say, but Vince, if you could say quickly what the suggestion was.
It was to include, because Calamares now has an option to install software packages during the install process. And that's what I suggested. So some other distros do it, like I think Garuda does. I know Arca Linux does it. I'm not quite sure what version of Calamares is required for that. And I'm not quite sure if that's available to them, but they said they're going to look into it. I understand that they've got a lot on their plate. So it's whenever you guys get to it, but I think that might help.
Yeah, the Debian Net installer is just like that. It gets to a point where you got to start picking the stuff you want to put in it.
Endeavour OS does that too, I believe.
Mm-hmm. All right, Penguin, go ahead. One more, and then we're going to move forward a little bit.
Just one last thought about the whole finding a way around it, because sometimes when you install it into your home directory, a lot of new users don't do that. But there's also Chromium and Firefox as a snap as well, and Flatpaks as well. And that's also a good way to keep your browser up to date and not break Debian, and not having to pull it down from unstable testing as well.
Well, that solves the Debian issue. That doesn't solve... it solves the accessibility of the stuff from Debian, but the problem is that snaps and Flatpaks are not there by default, so you couldn't really... You still have to install those. Then you have to install, like for Flatpak, you have to install the Flatpak, then you have to install the Flat Hub because they're separate things in the implementation most of the time, and then you can install the Flatpak for Firefox. That's too much to do for any kind of average user because they're not even aware that these different pieces are there. And I'm going to say something that I was probably going to get some hate on it. I don't think the choice of go to Debian was the best option. I would have rather seen them go to a different base for Fedora or OpenSUSE, something like that allows you to have more up-to-date packages, but also more up-to-date core fundamental components. Because a lot of the issues that I have with Peppermint OS for this particular version are not really Peppermint's fault. They're more the fact that they're based on Debian and they're not really able to compensate for what Debian does. So Debian might be great for a foundational distribution, but it also requires a lot of work to use it as a foundation versus what you would have with something like Fedora or OpenSUSE, where a lot of the work is done for you and you just put a little layer on top.
Well, and I think that's a fair criticism to make. I mean, and truth be told, this is the first release, and I'm sure that if anything was a major roadblock, that they could reverse it. But I'm guessing they're probably going to stick to Debian.
Yeah, yes, I'm just saying, like, the issue with the whole what browser do you pick? It's because the Debian problem. What makes it difficult to do certain things? It's the Debian problem. Like, there are just issues with that approach. But I think that there should be at least some browser, but they need to do some of the putting it on the onus of the user to solve it. I don't think is an ideal option because as long as Debian keeps the ESR up to date, which they don't always do, it's fine. But I think that's that's the only thing I feel like it's a little bit risky because of that. But as long as Debian keeps that up to date, then I'd say go with Firefox.
So going by that, I think the ESR does stay up to date, but when they couldn't update it was because they moved like 10 versions to the latest, and then that's when they had issues. So it's a 91, I think, and it should stay there for a while. So it should be quick for them to update that portion. For me, I would just use the Flatpak or the Snap. But it would be great, like they said, if there was an installer for choosing when you install the distro, what kind of browser you have. And going by the people's experience, I was going to mention the poll that I made for Telegram. And the poll said that how is the Peppermint OS exploration going? 19% said Peppermint OS is amazing. It's pretty sweet. 27% Peppermint OS is okay. 8% said, I'm not having a good time with Peppermint OS. 15% said, I'm not interested in trying Peppermint OS. 15%, I am unable to do this exploration this week. 12%, I'm not interested in doing the exploration in general. 4% said, other, please reply, state other, give details. Nobody gave any details for other, as far as I know.
That's usual, unfortunate.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, well. Well, I think these polls are really helpful, Eris. I mean, it just gives us some idea of whether or not, what will be interesting is, are there certain distributions where more people gravitate toward it and are willing to try it versus others that are more difficult? Like if we're doing something, Slackware or something like that, or is everybody gonna be like, no way, forget it? Or, so I'm not sure, but that I appreciate you doing it. And if we can do it each time, then we'll at least be able to track it and make sense of it. So, Steve, I think you wanted to talk about the default applications and whether or not what people thought about the selection that was there, and did they have to, other than the browser, did they have to go out and find other things, or was there a good enough sort of selection of things? Yeah.
Definitely, there is really no major selection. I mean, you got all your XFCE settings, apps, all that in there. You got Task Manager. They put GNOME disks in there. But as far as any type of other like production software, any type of like LibreOffice, none of that is in. They don't even set up any ICE applications like Peppermint used to do. It is really, truly, you need to, install virtually everything yourself. There's an image viewer, basic image viewer in that.
Is that part of the philosophy of everything you need and nothing you don't, or is it that this is just this release and they focused more attention on the installer and sort of all that and XFCE versus like, I don't remember in previous versions of Peppermint, did they have a curated set of default applications?
Not really, actually. Going back even with Peppermint 10, I mean, you had the ability because they had snaps, flat packs, they had GNOME software. They actually had 2 software centers in there that you can go, but the defaults were just like image viewer. They did Mark had set up several SSBs. He caught a lot of flack for the Microsoft ones being in there. But, or Google Drive, and he had, because a lot of people use Google, and back in the earlier days, it was being called a cloud distribution, which, and that was mainly because of ICE and what it can do. But it was basically the same. If you go back now and install Peppermint 10 and start off with that, you're going to find pretty much, you're going to have a browser off the bat. You will, but you won't have any real software installed outside of maybe some of the tools and this software center and that in there too. It's very, very limited, very, very minimal. I think this is even more minimal.
Yes, this does seem a little bit more minimal. I do agree that the previous version of PeppermintOS was very minimal, but I do think that the not having the ICE stuff, I think they should reconsider adding some ICE specific SSBs to the default, because there are a lot of potential for that.
I guess it was pointed out to me today that on the welcome screen, the 3 little icons that have
down on the bottom, community.
The community and all that. Those are
ICE applications.
They're SSB browser.
So it does. It opens in a tiny little window. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I have kind of a in-house browser. I know Peter had mentioned that in the forum.
Yeah, I asked because I was intrigued why it would open up an ICE, what looked like an ICE, when there was no browser installed. So I was very intrigued. So I asked in the forum, and they said they actually wrote some kind of WebKit or something application to handle those kind of links.
Yeah, so
it's interesting.
They've now made it easier. Though there was when you're using Snap, so you can like right off the bat go sudo snap install OBS-studio and have OBS Studio there. But there was an issue with the first, and because I was making the point that if we're going to keep this kind of new user friendly, we need to have maybe not necessarily a software center, but we need a easier spot for them to go to and get their software. To me, that I mentioned that's still a sticky point with me, because I always consider myself a new user, and I don't want to tinker. This is again a little more of a tinker distro. I can do it. That's not a problem, but that's not what I'm looking for like these days. But for a new user to be able to go and find that software, and that was kind of bannered about was, do we want a software center? Do we want anything remotely from Ubuntu kind of thing or that? But I still think it's still a necessity. And I know with this, I haven't installed a flat, but supposedly you had to make an extra step. You had to install a flat hub.
Yep.
To get them, and that was I think they fixed that. I haven't installed it, but I was going to see if
he did install the GNOME plugin too.
Yes.
Good, Dan. What were you going to bring up? Sorry, go ahead.
I noticed something really good though. With this laptop I got here, it's had Peppermint on it ever since I took it off Windows. So it started with Peppermint 8. And it always had a problem with it consuming the entire battery in about 2 to 3 hours. I can get 4 to 4.5 hours out of it with this distro.
That's very interesting.
That is really interesting. And another thing I wanted to kind of bring to light is if you look at the source list, why in the world did they put the unstable branch in the source list? What are they using that for?
I can comment on that one. They're just using that to bring the updated browsers and stuff. Because if a lot of people with Debian, they'll add that unstable browser, that unstable repo, just to pull down browsers to make sure that they're up to date. That's something I always did, and you can pull down these browsers without breaking Debian. Also, what I wanted to bring up was what Steve had brought up is this is not right now, as it sits, a new user distro whatsoever. You're going to have to know the Debian system to be able to pull down even LibreOffice, because that's not even an option to install when you hit the welcome screen. And a lot of people are going to be confused and be wondering where the Office suite is, because most people I know need an Office suite to even do their work. So I think that's a major problem with their initial out-of-the-box experience.
They don't even have in the source list a Peppermint source so they can update their stuff. They have to give you a new ISO anytime they add stuff because they haven't got a repo in the source list. Like LMDE has Linux Mint's source in the source list so they can upgrade Cinnamon when a new Cinnamon comes out, or a new Nemo, or any of them things.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We're sort of saying the same thing, kind of over and over a little bit. By design, there's not a lot of things there, but we're also saying that probably for a better user experience, there should be at least these key things, right? And let's also keep in mind, again, I know repeating ourselves, but this is that first release, rebasing the system. Yeah. So them not having a repo, them not having, all of these things are going to be things that are worked out over time. And they're going to fix these things. So
I'm sure they just gave us something to use for the time being until they add more to it.
Well, they had to get, I feel like, and Steve could correct me here, but I feel like they wanted to get something out there, right? Because there was this question about what is Peppermint doing? Is it going to move forward? Can it move forward? That sort of thing. And for just to sort of quell some of that, you have to get something going. And also, if you guys have, it's not unique to software development, but if you've ever done, if you're writing something, you're making something, anything where you're creating something from nothing, at some point you have to let other people look at it. You have to stop, stirring the pot and let someone taste it, right? You have to get it out there. So, and that it's not going to be 100% complete, especially with all the things that they've been trying to take on. So I appreciate, and I think they will appreciate too, hearing this, but I feel like we're kind of, saying the same thing in slightly different ways. So the question that I really like people to answer, right now is, and I think most people have already said, I think there's an expectation that there's at least some base set of software, one of each kind of thing, right? There's one browser, there's one, whatever category you want to bring up. There's an image viewer. There's that sort of thing, right? That's kind of all what we're saying here. Colin, what do you have?
Well, from my experience on the video that I did, I think if I could give a suggestion to Peppermint, if they watch this, I really think they should have the GNOME store in by default, because they are aiming at new users. It does say that on the website. So I think that their plan is for new users. They're just not there yet, like you said. It'll be beneficial to have the GNOME store installed. And then when you install FlatHub and SnapStore, that should run all setup commands. So everything is in the GNOME software. So new people are not confused when they open the software. They've got more up-to-date software being on Debian.
I got a GNOME software store with mine, but the problem is when you open it up, it takes 5 minutes to populate.
Yeah, but that's typical on any distro, though. It takes a while to populate everything in the GNOME software. I've had that experience no matter.
A new user ain't going to be happy with that.
Yeah.
Well, it's better than a new user not having any software store at all. I mean, see, the thing is, you go to FlatHub, and you go to the suggested packages, and you click on FlatHub, and you install or Flatpak, and you click Flatpak. A new user would expect to see software from Flatpak somewhere. They're going to be confused. They're not going to know where the software is. There's no store on the system.
In the GNOME store, you do see Flatpaks in there, but you got to search for the item you're looking for. Let's say you're looking for a VLC. And then you can click on VLC. Then you got to go down to the list on the side, and it'll say it either comes from Debian or it comes from Flatpak. Or it may have two VLCs. You could choose which one you want.
Right.
Yeah,
well, that's mostly because
there's no button in the GNOME store to, I want Debian or I want Flatpaks.
There is a button for the GNOME software to do that, but not in the one Debian has.
Yeah, I thought I've seen it before, but I have not seen it.
The GNOME 41 has the ability to choose which one you want. It has one entry and it's a little drop down. You can pick which one you want. And in the GNOME 3.38, that's the version that's in Debian. And that by itself is also another issue. But I do agree that there should be a store by default that can integrate with Flatpak, where right now you don't have a store or Flatpaks. And then when you do use that installer for the Flatpaks, you still got to install the FlatHub. And then you also still got to install the Flatpak, the detector for GNOME software to do. I forgot what the actual package name is called.
GNOME software plugin Flatpak.
Yeah,
or
there
Snap.
You go. You need the Flatpak plugin for GNOME software to make it detect the Flatpaks. So there is a little bit of, if they want to, I think that there's an issue of Peppermint OS currently is not for beginners, but the messaging on the website is still, I think it's the same from the previous version of Peppermint. It hasn't been updated to reflect the new changes. And if they want to focus on new users, that's great. But they need to do they need to address the new user approach, or feel free to just make it clear that that's no longer your target.
I think it is their target. I think it's just their first release, and I think it's their goal. I'd have to think so. I'm just making some constructive criticisms here for Peppermint. Because I want to see them succeed in this. I'm just a bit confused as to whether it is for new users or not at this point in time. But I have to think it's their goal. And
I had used a lot of Debian knowledge to put it together. It was like a box of Legos.
I think they need to decide how they're going to proceed in that. I know they say that it could be for a new user or maybe more advanced user. I think now is the time to commit to something, because it's going to be a lot more work carrying to both sides. And I think if they really want to be for both new users and more advanced users, they should lean more towards new users, because the advanced users can always just take things out or work around them. And going back to the browser, same thing. Everybody wants a browser something by default.
Again, it's the first release. Let's see what the future brings.
Yeah,
I agree with that, but we also need to make it clear that they need because there's so many questions related to it, that one of the things that I hope that they answer is what target they're going for. Because
definitely. And you know what? So we're here discussing in Zoom, on video, but there's a pretty good discussion going in the YouTube comments as well. And it's basically what we're saying. It's back and forth. Is it better to have anything out with maybe some glaring omissions or some problems, or, and basically saying, okay, this is ready for people to use, or would it be better to wait and do more work on it? And you've got people arguing both sides. And it is one of those tough decisions about how do you best, meet the needs of your community, move forward with what you're doing, get something out there for people to use, to get this sort of critical feedback that we're giving here tonight. But not not unloading something on them that's too difficult to use, I guess.
So that is also worth mentioning. Now they have a public repo for development, and that should be proud of this part of this discussion about the new distro, because that wasn't there before. So now they'll be able to work better with anybody who wants to contribute to the development of the distro. And I think you wanted to say something, Penguin?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there are a couple of things that as far as releasing something, I think they probably should have released this as a beta and testing instead of putting it out as a official release for the public to use. If they were trying to figure out what they needed to fix first before saying, well, this is ready to use, because it seemed like to me that wasn't ready for release yet.
Something I'll say is I would give a lot of credit to the devs. They, as we've mentioned, they've now put the public repos out so people can have a look at the code and file issues and whatnot. That was something that wasn't there before. And I've heard Graphic, who's one of the main devs, speak about it, is that a lot of the work has been to actually document what they're doing, all the steps as they go along, so that people can view what they're doing and so that people can contribute. And if something was to happen to one of the devs, anybody else could take over if they wanted to. And I think that's been great. And I also see KS Woodsman in YouTube chat as well. He's one of the devs too. Since we were talking about snaps, I found a bug in it. So if you install snapd, there's a problem then with Peppermint Hub. It doesn't load anymore. And to the devs' credit,
that's why.
Yeah, did you find that as well?
Yeah, I didn't know why it wasn't loading. Yeah,
I posted it to the Peppermint forums, and the devs have been super responsive. They've been so quick to jump on the issue. And I just checked again during the stream, and Chaos Woodsman's posted a fix to it in the forum. I'll grab the link and I'll post it in chat. And so they've been really, really good with all that, really receptive, and I give them a lot of credit.
Yeah, and that's where we're getting the feedback. Like Eris just put in the comments. I mean, Dan had said as well. I mean, this is something to be proud of. This is a very difficult thing to do. Dolphin, is chiming in as well. So, you don't just produce software. It doesn't just happen. Like Dolphin made the comment. Someone said, "Oh, it took 20 minutes for this last." No, it didn't take 20 minutes. It may have took 20 minutes to build the ISO, but it didn't take 20 minutes to do all the work behind it. So. So I think we all understand that. And it's really, there's nothing wrong with us being a little bit critical and giving, because that kind of helps them set their priorities, right? I think the more they hear of this one thing is not a great situation, then, and like Vince is saying, like they are ready and waiting to hear this kind of feedback. They knew this, that people would have opinions on it. So Nate, you made it. Hi.
I did. So I'm not home.
That's okay. You sound fine.
Obviously. I just want to say, I tried Peppermint, and it's definitely not the Peppermint of ye old. But, I think the artwork and the feel is still there. I don't know if anyone can agree with that or not, but it still feels like Peppermint. I personally like the theming, that it's a nice, beautiful, dark theme with red and white highlights that kind of gives that, peppermint candy that, the crazy old man gives you, when you enter church or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't change hardly anything at all in the theming.
But so I thought it was great. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about the sharply limited software, though. I kind of feel like, maybe perhaps something a little bit more. I think you guys kind of touched on it a little bit earlier about how, like a default image viewer, maybe some sort of an Office application, or I guess those are debatable because of ICE and everything else too. Or some sort of an easier on-ramp to getting those Office applications. Because, I don't know about
the image viewers in the box with all the browsers.
Yeah, I understand that. But I'm saying it might be just for like out of the gate, a run. It might be easier for people because if it's supposed to be for new users, I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm just having a conversation here. I don't really know if that's the right answer, but I kind of lean toward that. So it kind of makes me uncertain as to who the target audience is. It doesn't seem like the lower tier of new user, maybe a middle tier, someone who knows kind of what they want. But I really like the fact that they have the way you can select some bits of software. Oh, it says browser selection, and there's, again, you touched on that earlier, a bunch of other things thrown in there. But I do want to say though, I appreciate that it's a good way to get Debian installed very quickly. So I think we didn't really kind of hit that. But if you want a Debian XFCE experience, you just want to install it very quickly, this is not a bad way to go either. And, Debian isn't my first choice or second or third, but it's, if I wanted Debian for some reason on an x86 64-bit architecture, this seems like a great way to do that. And maybe there's an opportunity there in the future. I mean, this is the first release. So, I couldn't do this, so I'm not going to be too critical. I'm not going to say it's right. I'm not going to throw in disparaging remarks because, I mean, if you ask me to do that, I'd give you the blank stare. Yeah. But they did do, I think, a really good job for the first time. There's also this old adage too, and I know I'm monopolizing now, but there's the idea you have to sometimes shoot the engineer to go to production. And I think there's probably some of that going on for a while where there's just some turnover, let's go work on this. Then as software kind of shifts and they're working on it again. And at some point in time, you just got to, go to print. And I think
get it off the bench and get it in the store.
Something, it's better to get an 80% solution and not shoot, and then not shoot at all because you couldn't get a perfect solution. So I think they did okay. I'm not going to be too harsh on it.
Yep.
So to me, the way that KDE Neon does it, I think is ideal. The way they give you a document viewer, a video player, I think VLC, and that's it. I think in the browser, those three things. You have those three things. I think that's enough. Not too big. You don't have the if you want to keep it lean, you don't have LibreOffice and like anything bigger than that. Well, to me, that's ideal for me. I don't know if other people feel the same.
I would have to very clearly point out that Neon is not meant to be used by anyone who's not developing KDE. So
technically,
I'm just talking about the applications themselves. The thing comes with.
There's a difference between minimal and not enough, for sure.
I think this comes down to what Nate just said about identifying your audience. And really, I think if we understood the audience, that would make it much easier for us to know then, okay, like you're saying, Eric.
Yeah, I think the marketing needs to match the product. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you fine.
Okay, good.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're right. I think that's what.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the marketing needs to match what they're putting out. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to get through these last few comments and we're going to start moving forward a little bit. So Dan, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that there's a lot of mature distributions that have been around a while that don't seem to capture the same consistent theming throughout their distribution. So I think Nate's point there is spot on, and this is very well done. They're until somewhat recently, there isn't a whole lot of dark theme choices in XFCE, and this is another one, and I think it's well done.
Good point. Penguin, go ahead.
Okay, two things. I'm going to touch on Nate's little comment about the incomplete product. Nothing is perfect when even mature distributions, you're going to find something that you don't either like or doesn't work. And for people who want to try out Peppermint OS, you have to keep and have been using it for quite a while since like Peppermint 10 or before it. You have to keep this in mind. This is the first release since Mark died, and someone else had to take it over, and they're basically starting from scratch because Mark practically did almost everything by himself. So they had to try and figure everything out, and then they rebranded to a different base and all that kind of stuff. So you're going to have some problems when you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, I think, one of the things they're trying to do is to get away from this idea that one person has so much of an impact. And he never did it. It was only out of him wanting to make it a better thing. It wasn't about ownership or any of that. I think it was much more just he was the de facto guy. But that puts you in that situation where if he's not there, then you're in trouble. So I think what the goal of getting this to where it's something that's supportable and available to be developed by more than just this core group of a few people makes a lot of sense. And it's something that's necessary for the longevity of the distro, honestly. So Colin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think documentation is important as well. So if the target's going to be new users, it'd be nice to have some documentation there, just letting people know how FlatHub works, how the Snap Store works, what it's all about. I think that's important for people to know that. I mean, us experienced users, we know how it works. I mean, and it's good that they've got the FlatHub and the app image and everything there. And I'm happy to say that with the new release, I downloaded that this morning like Steve and installed it, and all those links are now working in the Peppermint Hub, which is great. So it gives the people a bit more information on that. But yeah, just, you know, I think a lot of people talk about documentation. It'd be nice to just have something there that could lead people into what's going on with the software itself. Because I think I'm a big fan of FlatHub at the moment, because I did make a video last week talking about how Nate gave me for a reference Back to the Future. The FlatHubs are my DeLorean of the Linux world, because whether I use them on Arch Linux or whether I use them on Debian, those core apps can stay stable and at the version that I want. So it doesn't matter where you are, you're moving around with those core apps that you need. So
you got to have the Flat Seal tool to help.
And the Flat Seal tool as well.
I didn't know about that until someone brought it up.
But yeah, documentation, I think, probably important in this, just for this example for Peppermint, and in regards to new users might help a little bit. So just a suggestion again, I suppose.
Yeah, and and these are all great suggestions. I think this is the whole point. So, all right. So one of the things we do at the end of the is, well, obviously we've gotten through this, and I think everybody's had their opportunity to. Does anyone have any last thought on Peppermint that you feel like you've been biting your tongue? Jinda, anyone else? Someone who hasn't spoken?
Not really. It was actually pretty nice.
Yeah.
Good.
If I may, I can read kind of what you might call a mission statement, something that Graphic gave me. I read it last week on my show, but give it to a wider audience if you don't mind. Just take a moment. So what he sent me was, we have transitioned into a DevOps development method. DevOps is a software development methodology, that combines software development, dev, with information technology operations community, participating together in the entire service lifecycle, from design through the development process to production support. The goal of DevOps: fast development methodologies, fast quality assurance methodology, fast deployment methodologies, faster time to release, iteration and continuous feedback, strong continuous communication between stakeholders, the community, specifically the end users and community, development, testers, all working together. My vision for Peppermint is to make it grow and be organic. I want people to find Peppermint everywhere. I want people to respin it. I want people to see it, the value, as more than just a desktop distro. I want people to be interested in to build applications, contribute code to it, whether it's Tkinter, GTK, or Python, or anything else. Ultimately, I want Peppermint to live through the years. We are better than we were before, team-wise. It's not just one developer or just MG doing everything. If any of us leaves for any reason, the organization should be able to keep going. I think by growing the community and diversifying, we can achieve that. You know, I reach out to the Kali community, to Calamares, to the Debian community, to MX, to XFCE, Arch, to Dev1, and to OpenSUSE and others, because they do things that are innovative and interesting. So I ask them questions. They have features that I know we can build into Peppermint over time, or even collaborate with them to build useful, powerful applications. My intention was never to make a simply desktop distro. We are on track to put out a Debian-based rolling release. After that, Case Woodsman and I are getting ready to start on Dev1 ISO for the non-system D folk. From there, it's a path for maybe an Ubuntu base if we want it. You know why? Because they all use live build. For some reason that was not used in the past. That allows us to be completely versatile in what we do. We can make ISO adjustments with relative ease because of the back-end code and documentation that we wrote. Over the past few years, my point is Peppermint is morphing into a multi-use distro that has a lot of versatility and use cases, which can allow the community to grow. As we build a collaborative community, we can build things based on ideas when we want to.
All right. I mean, I wouldn't say that's a mission statement, more of a mission novel, but yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. There's lots of little nuggets in there to pull out, and I think that's good, and it will become narrower in focus and clearer over time. So I think Pep has a great legacy. It's done some wonderful things in the past. It has some really great people involved with it, both from a development standpoint and a community standpoint. They've proven that they're able to move forward and to build something new. And I think from here, they're just going to be able to do, good things moving forward. And it maybe is a little too, it's not the best time to just kind of like stick a flag in the ground and say, well, it's either good or it's bad or it's this or that. It is what it is right now. And we can see that it's progressing, which is great. So Nate, go ahead.
So I just want to have some final thoughts from me on Peppermint. So I truly believe what they're doing is really an honor to Mark's legacy. So I really, truly appreciate that. If no one picks up like what he left off and just let Peppermint go into obscurity, then it would just have faded away into nothingness. And in many ways, Mark's legacy with that would have just gone away. So one of the reality of these smaller projects is they're typically they sit on the backs of just one or a few people. And when there's a change in leadership, there's going to be a pretty dramatic change quite often. And so, at this point, one has to decide if the new direction is to their liking. And I truly wish the project the utmost success, but most of all, to find joy in expressing their ideal desktop Linux experience. Because as much as there's science in software development, I also believe it's an art and a way to express oneself. And so I like to see people express themselves through their software, through their distributions, or whatever it is that they do. And that to me is like the unique competitive edge that all of Linux has, that doesn't exist in other maybe it does, but doesn't really exist in the forefront. So I thank them for taking the time to keep Mark's legacy alive, and I hope they continue for many years because it's fun to watch, a new generation take it on.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to summarize it, and I agree that was the big thing, right, Mark? Being this great loss, not only just because he was a good person, but because of how much he did for Peppermint. So, anyway, Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what Steve said there, what he read out, just goes to show that the distro wasn't slapped together in 5 minutes. They've been making some changes in the back end, big time, to set themselves up for the future. That's very obvious with what he was saying. And I think also there's nothing better, harping on the new user thing, there's probably nothing better for a new user than to have a rolling distro that's stable. So they do not have to reinstall again. So that's a great move forward as well. I just wanted to finish off with that.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, well, I think we are going to move on, and then we're going to pick the distribution for next week. Michael, do you have any news on that?
Any news on what distribution is being picked?
Yeah, what should we go with? What do you think? Just make a decision. You don't need to consult us. Just pick something.
Well, okay. Since I'm as the guest host for this particular week, I'll take that responsibility and just go ahead and say what we're going to do. And the reason I want to do it is because he's in the chat right now. We're going to go with Dolphin Oracle's MX Linux.
Nice. Good choice.
So next week, we'll talk about MX Linux, and then we can maybe go into like Linux from scratch after that. There's options.
Are you saying like MX like
Linux from scratch?
So there's options, plenty of options. But let's move on to the next Act 3 of.
Sorry, Hunter. I'm sorry. You had a question?
Were you saying MX like in Emacs, M-X or
MX? The letters MX.
MXLinux.org is the website.
Right. Yeah.
MX Linux.
Yeah, mxlinux.org, and it's
one of my all-time favorite distros out there. I've run it several
Well, then you better be here next week then.
Love MX, and gotta love running with the Dolphin. The development is outstanding. The coders for that is
so good. We'll like your perspective then next week. You
some
gotta
of
come
the
back.
very best you'll find.
So Dolphin's response in the chat was, "Oh God."
Oh God, he doesn't like the compliment.
Just tell him we'll be glad just to pick it apart.
I noticed that. I've complimented him in the past, and not everybody likes the compliment.
Oh, see, he's trying to commiserate with KS Woodsman. Sorry, guys. Excellent. Okay, so I believe last time I checked out MX Linux, there was their core is XFCE, and then they have a KDE version as well, I believe, if that's correct.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
They also have Fluxbox now too.
I'm sorry, what was that, Dan?
I said they also have Fluxbox now too.
Okay.
Yep,
So you're
three different spins. They have XFCE, KDE Plasma, and Fluxbox.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And obviously, Plasma is the best option.
Okay.
Just a question. Are we just going to all try to do like one spin, or are we just going to leave that up to the person?
Yeah, exactly. The Penguin. You just pick whatever you're comfortable with. If you want to do Plasma, great. If you want to do their main XFC, that's great. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me. I was just wondering.
Right. And I will say, sort of preface this as well, is that MX, at least in my opinion, the magic of that distribution is a lot of their custom tools that they provide people. It's very easy to do really cool stuff. Like I have a recovery.
That's a big selling point to it, but it's also very stable.
Yeah, but so I'll set it up. Last time I did it, I set up a KDE environment the way I wanted it to be, and then you can make it your own ISO from that, and then be able to deploy that ISO. So there's some really, really interesting
really cool.
Administrative tools and things like that. So be on the lookout for that if you're testing it. So Dan, I think you guys are featuring MX Linux, are you not?
We are, and so our episode is going to release Monday. Linux User Space, that show, and we've spent a month-long journey exploring MX Linux, and we'll dive into the history a little bit and give some of that as well. So that's probably a really good segue into trying it out, so you can hear about the history and everything about it.
Yeah, and if you guys haven't checked out Linux User Space, Dan and Leo really do a nice deep dive. Like he said, they go for a month, whereas a lot of people, they'll go for a week or a few days or something, and they really, really dig in and have a lot of background on it and come at it from a couple of different perspectives, end user, and then DevOps and SysOps kind of stuff. And so you find out a lot of stuff that you may not have otherwise learned, just from taking a light cursory look at it. You get a real nice in-depth view of it. So, and sometimes their podcasts are like 2 hours long, which is pretty crazy. So
when you go into the super in-depth distributions, you don't really have a choice. Sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt.
In-depth is distribution, in-depth episode.
Yeah, history is sometimes tough to cut back.
Yeah, that's true.
So, okay, we're going to do MX Linux for next week. That kind of sets the groundwork for that. And the rest of the show, then we really want to just open it up for discussion around, things that you've wanted to do or have done, or any questions, if there's any problems, troubleshooting kind of stuff, or new software you've found. Maybe there's a new cool app that you found that you want to share with us.
When I was on lunch yesterday, I was looking through some feeds, and I saw that, Twister OS for the Raspberry Pi also now has a
Twister UI theming thing. Yep.
New UI theming that you can throw not on all distros yet, only on specific ones, but you can change to like a Windows 95 look or Windows 10 or a couple other distribution looks.
311?
No.
Not quite that
not in
bad.
the list. Unfortunately, it's not on the list for some reason.
Is this a theming engine?
It's not a theming engine. It's more of like they make changes to your XFCE. It only exclusively works with XFCE, and it only so far has been tested with Linux Mint, Ubuntu, and Manjaro. The other ones are like there are people testing with other things, but so far those are the ones that they know work. But this is still specifically to XFCE. So it's interesting.
I just thought it was interesting.
Can someone find a link for that? I mean, I'm curious now too. I'm very interested to see what it's about.
When Michael talked about it on his show today, I was looking at it and on the show, and it looked very interesting.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll put it in the in chat.
He muted himself.
Sorry, twisteros.com is the website that they have the Twister UI like on a sub page, and there's a way to there's a way to download the depending on your different.
Oh, I see it. I see it. Yeah. Okay, I'll link to that as well.
Yeah. So I think that it's an interesting topic because the Twister UI is interesting because there's a lot of distributions who already have the way to modify. Like Zorin has their own customizations. You can switch a layout, and Amate has the interface switcher built into it. I think, and also the look and feels of Plasma. Of course, I got to mention Plasmas. There's a lot of different approaches to doing it, but they all, they don't fully go into the in-depth of how to copy a thing. And this one is like a direct copy of like the Windows XP look. If you for some reason want to go back to 2002, then you can totally get this if you want, I guess.
Well, you know what? I'm going to have to take you up on that and see. It's going to be some kind of weird blast from the past, but that's fine.
I like Fisher Price Windows. What's wrong with Fisher Price Windows?
So I had something, I don't know if people remember, but last week I couldn't get on Zoom on my computer because I was on Pop! OS and it wasn't recognizing my microphone. And I struggled with it for part of this week where I was thinking, okay, maybe it's got to be a kernel, version issue or a driver issue. I'm using a USB audio interface. I have this microphone plugs into that and then into the computer through USB. And it's always just worked. And so I was really kind of thrown off. And then this afternoon, it occurred to me, why don't I look at PAVU control and see if it shows up in there? And sure enough, in PAVU control, I can see all my devices and I'm able obviously to pick this mic. I'm on Pop right now, so I'm able to use this microphone and no problems through that. But if I go to GNOME settings and look at the sound properties or the sound settings, those devices do not show up there. And I don't know if this is just a Pop! OS thing. Has anyone else ever seen that where there'll be some devices or all the devices in PAVU control and some not in the desktop environments?
I've been fighting with that with Peppermint all week long.
Oh, okay.
You have to go all the way down and start with the ALSA mixer. There is an ALSA loader. It's called ALSA Control, CTL. Also, you set your Pulsar or your ALSA mixer up the way you want it and test everything and hit escape. Then you actually go and run the command ALSA control space, the file location to where it's at, and then store. That stores all that stuff in a file. And my problem is I could not get it to restore because this command on this laptop requires sudo privileges in order to use it. So I took everything apart. I tried running a cron tab. I tried all these things. And for some reason, that particular item does not work without sudo. So I wrote some scripts. So when the computer starts up in XFCE, there's a startup application where you go in there and you set up a link to a startup script. So when it starts up, it'll start up. You put in your password to get in, then the terminal will pop up because you set the file for it for terminal true. You put in your password for the root again, and then it'll load your settings.
Isn't there already a service that restores your ALSA state for you automatically though?
It's supposed to work, and it works on this computer I'm talking to you now, my main rig. But on this laptop, for some reason, it must be the age or something like that. It requires sudo privileges to do any audio setting or restoring or storing. But I spent hours reading. I mean, I spent 5 hours a day for 5 days combing the internet for all kinds of solutions.
Wow.
And it all come up to the same thing. So I wrote a script around the same thing I kept digging up. Half the stuff I found was really outdated.
Yeah, and I mean that's not really the same problem I was having, but
but your microphone is in the ALSA mixer, and if it's muted down at the bottom, you'll see double M's under everything. If you hit the M, it'll unmute it.
Right. No, this is where there's just something I don't know where GNOME settings is getting its list of hardware, I guess is the better way to term it, because under PAVU control, it's reading a different list of available devices, right? And then under GNOME, I don't see those same devices. So there's got to be some kind
of... You got a layer on top of a layer and then another layer.
Right.
The layers get all mixed up.
Yeah, I've got... Eric, it looks like you're actually using the same mic that I am. What GNOME settings likes to do a lot of times is if you've got both ALSA and Pulse installed, it'll pull it from ALSA. And this particular mic that we're using does not work with ALSA at all. So,
but this,
I think that's
what mic do you have?
He's not using ALSA anyway. I mean, you are.
Well,
but
I'm
he's
just
not
saying.
interacting.
Sometimes.
We lost him.
He just muted right then.
We can't hear you, Penguin.
That's so perfect. Also. Talking about audio
that was absolutely perfect. I don't know how he did that, right? No,
what I've dug up is Pulse Audio is just a GUI overlay for ALSA. It's not much more than that.
That's not accurate. No,
that's not even true remotely.
No, that's what I read when I went to the Pulse Audio website.
That's not true.
That's not accurate. No,
it's
a completely separate thing.
But now it's not.
Okay, Penguin, you're on a different mic now, just so you know.
Yeah. No,
okay.
I turned it off because this one's causing problems again.
Yeah, so this in particular, just if it matters, this is an XLR mic that goes into a USB audio interface because there's no way to connect it to the computer. Otherwise,
so you have the XLR version. Okay, I was going to say it looks a lot like my microphone, but yeah, this one doesn't work with ALSA at all. So
okay, yeah. So this is just it's an XLR Electro Voice mic. Anyway, it's not that the real challenge is the USB audio interface is essentially a different sound card, right? It has an input and an output shown whenever you connect it to a computer. Linux thinks it's just, a sound card essentially, right? Inputs and outputs. And for some reason, the inputs and outputs differ between two different places in the operating system, in the desktop, right? And on PAVU control, I see everything. In GNOME, I don't. So that's my only question was if anyone had ever seen that before. And
I installed the extension, the sound input and output selector, which which will show all everything that you have selected.
That's interesting. If I install that and it actually shows me something different, that'll be really interesting.
I wonder what Pop! OS has by default, because I think they do have something like that installed. I think they do have an extension for something related to it, because by default, GNOME doesn't have an audio devices listing on their shell.
Yeah, the input selector will give you more. It will actually see. It seems to see what is in Pulse Control, where their main one is like whatever you might have you be using at the time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. That's funny. I just installed it, and it does see.
It's a nice little tool, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about it. Yeah.
Can you tell us what that package was again?
It's the GNOME extension. It's the sound input and output selector.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll link to it in the.
I used to maintain
one of
because
it almost sounded like you were having a GNOME problem, Eric, and I totally forgot about that extension. It's been about over a year since I used GNOME. So. Right.
Yeah. There's quite a few of them. I'm not sure which one is the better option.
Here's the one right here. It's called Sound Input and Output Device Chooser, and basically what it does is on the right hand system tray for GNOME. Whenever you click that down, instead of just seeing the device, it actually lets you pick your input and output device right from there, from a drop down list.
Right.
And interestingly, that extension is seeing the full list of input devices, whereas again, GNOME settings does not. And so where I ran into problems was I was looking at GNOME settings saying, well, how, why is the microphone not there that should be there?
Maybe they removed that feature.
Yeah. Then if you go into the extension itself and you hit the gear, it brings up
actually, what, Steve?
Of stuff.
Now that I look at it, it doesn't. I was wrong. It doesn't have it.
Okay.
Yeah, it still sees just what GNOME sees, but PAVU control does see.
It seems like it's not directly connecting to the right source, like the right
Right.
sources. It's not
Like it's
connecting
some
to
socket,
Pulse,
and it's like
not connecting to ALSA or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Because Pop! OS is using Pipewire too.
So there's a here's a question: are you sure that this particular audio interface doesn't require some sort of proprietary driver that you're missing?
It never has, and that was my initial thought too. Penguin was that I spent the first few hours troubleshooting this as a kernel issue or a kernel module issue, or something where it was more related to the hardware enablement component, and it wasn't. The hardware is there. I know it's connected, and obviously all I needed to do was use a different way to look at the devices on the system, because that's the other thing. I mean, when you troubleshoot and you look for a USB device, it's either going to not show up in your list, LSUSB type list and stuff like that, or it's going to show and not have a way to understand what the device is, right? You're going to be able to tell that. Yeah. I didn't see any of that. There was no evidence that it wasn't working at all. And that's what was so confusing. And so it was kind of dumb luck that I figured out to use PAVU control to see the Pulse, devices on the system. So anyway, I think there's no reason to beat the dead horse. I mean, I just was curious if anyone had seen it. And if anyone has that problem in the future, you're having an issue with your devices that you're trying to pick, try PAVU control just to see if maybe that'll help.
Well, Eric, yeah, we tend as Linux tinkers, we tend to beat the dead horse a lot, trying to figure everything out.
Yeah, exactly.
It does come up a lot on our Linux lug meetings where we're trying to help folks out. A lot of people have different equipment and they're trying to get the mics working. Sometimes it's the mic through the laptop, and PAVU control does help most often.
It's funny, Mark, I was actually going to join last week, bug you guys about it. And I just didn't get the chance to do it. I had it on my calendar. My wife even said, "What's ALE?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." So yeah, I was going to come say, "Hey guys, fix my computer for me."
My issue I'm having is I've isolated it down to a Debian issue, not a Peppermint issue, because I tried like LMDE4. That one works. Ubuntu works. Cinnamon works. Anything that's Debian does not work right for this laptop. So,
well, Dan, I think that might just be the age of the laptop, because a lot of times
it is. I'm trying to beat a dead horse for another 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
and I got scripts to work around that.
Dying horse. It's not dead yet. That's why.
Yeah, but all the top end really heavy lifter distros out there will work with it.
The thing with Debian is it uses a lot of older packages, which you would think wouldn't be affected by older hardware. But I find that using newer hardware on my other laptop, which is about 12 years old, designed for Windows 7, Debian does not like to play nice with it either.
Yeah, this one's a Vista
I have
machine.
to run like Arch on that thing for it to work right. And for some reason, those bleeding edge packages work better on it. And I hate Arch, but I have to run it on that particular computer.
There's also a misconception.
I just wrote some scripts to initialize stuff right off the get-go, and it works fine that way because it's the only option I got other than to try something else.
Right, but that's a workaround. That's just you're trying to make something
I'm
something
beating the dead horse.
Not necessarily that. You're trying to make something good out of a bad situation. But there's a misconception that people have with the Linux kernel getting that's only getting new support for hardware that's just came out. There's also improvements to older hardware when you get new versions of the kernel. That's
another thing I did too, Michael, is I actually went and installed the Buster kernel, which is 4.19. I went backwards. I went backwards and got the older firmware for the audio, the audio chip, the older Intel firmware. I had no change.
Yeah, because you're going into worse support. That's what that's going to be.
One question, Dan. Have you checked that you actually have the Linux firmware package installed?
Yes, I went through all the commands and everything like that, like they had on all the web pages, and it all showed up the way it was supposed to. And
okay, well, I know that that's kind of a stupid question, but there was one time, like a couple weeks ago, I was installing on something on my Chromebook that I just tinker with, and I couldn't get like a couple things to work, and for some reason I'd forgotten to install the Linux firmware package, so it was missing a bunch of.
I had that problem with the Wi-Fi card in it. The firmware for that was not installed. However, I do have it on a USB stick, and once I found the right Broadcom driver on the stick and installed it, it come online.
Well, the thing about Broadcom codes is they all use proprietary drivers, so you gotta have that proprietary driver.
That's usually by default for most distros. I have to ask, why do you want to use Debian if you're constantly dealing with these issues? Like you said earlier,
it's one laptop. It's a Pep top. It's always had Peppermint on it.
Okay, well,
it's sentimental.
Okay, there you go.
Not only that, the audio system in it is unlike any of my other laptops or desktops because it has a line in, a line out, a headphone.
Okay,
and
I understand
stuff like that.
I get it. It's sentimental reasons. Okay.
Okay.
So
and there's one more thing I would try, Dan, is pull down the Linux kernel. That has a lot of other firmware attached to it, and I find that also works.
Which kernel?
The Linux kernel. It's also called the Zen kernel.
Oh yeah, I know. I've heard of the Zen kernel.
Okay, it's the same thing. It's basically the same thing. And
so the laptop needs to be Zen.
Better.
It's too unruly, man. It needs to Zen.
Okay. All right, you guys are killing me. I'm telling you. This is fantastic. Just in case anyone's wondering, I am thoroughly entertained right now.
I'm entertained.
The Zen of Linux.
I've been trying to get this out, but I wanted to make sure everybody else had their piece in before I started talking.
Dan, I love when you're here. I look forward to talking with you. I always do.
It's been a while.
Yep.
But I missed the list.
I have the list. I never got to it. There's 2 pages.
Check it twice.
Not just one. There's 2 of them.
Well, the idea is to intermix and make conversation out of your list.
But if I went through this list, there nobody have any time to talk.
Dan, I appreciate yourself. Your restraint.
Most of you other guys covered stuff that I had dealt with on here too.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Since you took the time to make the list, is there anything that we did not bring up that you want to cover? Don't just pick something randomly because I'm asking you. If there's something you legitimately want to talk about, let's do it.
No, we covered the installer. I brought out my point on that. Blah, blah, blah. Small things like the terminal and Peppermint, the sidebar wasn't activated, so I didn't. I had to hunt for the thing to turn that on. I didn't know if it was.
Let me ask you this. So, Steve, if Dan has a lot of, because he's very thorough, and I appreciate that. Can he go to the forum? Where's the best way for him to give this kind of information back?
Yeah, the forum. They're looking for help. Can reach out. I know maybe Codeberg. They had a thing there where you can contribute, but you can start out at the forum. It worked for Vince; they let him in, but
no guarantees. But at least we got one example.
Okay, so they have bad, they have bad judgment.
I just had some little niggle things to another thing, like when you open a folder that's full of let's say music on any other machine, it shows the media picture that's embedded in it. Same with video.
That's just a thumbnail issue.
Yeah. Thumbnail issues with those.
That is something that'd be very good for the forum thread.
That's nitpicky stuff, though.
No, it's not. Dan.
That's a good.
No, it's not.
People want that.
Do you understand? Like QA testing is so specific and tiny, and like what you do is what people get paid to do, Dan. It's true. And QA testing is like a very specific type of, it's a methodical, you have to be very detail oriented. You do a very good job of that. That's what I'm saying. It would be a waste if you didn't communicate this stuff to the team. So
I put this up against the Debian non-free ISO that had XFCE on it. And that, compared to Peppermint, that one was a mess. It looked like the panel was all not really organized very well. And they had,
it's like they just put the packages in there, but they don't put any of the configuration behind it. Yeah,
I think the Peppermint team is really open.
Good, Nate.
Okay.
So the Peppermint team is really open to suggestions too. So I mean, they're just gonna absorb it like a sponge from you. So yeah, you should transcribe that with the keyboard, put it on the forum, and I think you should share it. I think it's
Dan. I just posted a link to their matrix. That's open matrix
in the Zoom chat,
in Zoom chat.
All right. Well,
so
we are
taking us to the matrix. We've now entered the matrix. Is that right?
I think I have the matrix open.
Peter has a question.
The Peppermint matrix.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Quick statement. I'm still a Solus user. Don't worry about that. I'm still a PC Linux OS user. I love that system. But I have dedicated a laptop to Peppermint, and I'm in for the long haul.
That's the same. I got a Pep book right here. That's all it's had on it since it came off Windows.
I admire the dedication, and I'll tell you what, that kind of feedback is priceless for them. So let's follow through on that. And with that, though, we are at 10 o'clock. So Nate, would you like to finish out the ceremonies?
Well, I don't have my right mic.
No, you sound fine.
Well, I know it's echoey in here.
Doesn't matter. You sound fine.
Well, I do want to thank you all for being a part of the show. I couldn't be here for the whole thing because I had some obligations. So thank you so much, Michael, for picking up my slack.
No problem, buddy.
In my mind, I was thinking of like the principal in Back to the Future when he's like, slacker, when I said, hey, just another Back to the Future reference. What's his name? Coach, Principal Strickland. That's what it was, Strickland.
Yes. Strickland, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, Colin probably looks more like Strickland than anybody else in here, but, I mean that nicely.
Slacker.
Perfect.
Ooh, and he says it with the even better accent, too.
He does.
And I just want tomorrow morning, Steve, I'm going to miss you, but are you still doing your coffee clash?
Yeah. It's been a rough week, and I actually have nothing planned, but I guess I never really do. So
perfect. Well, look forward to that. That's 8 a.m. Central or 9 a.m. Eastern for like the, for the civilized world, I think. And then also very exciting tomorrow, Destination Linux. Michael, what are you guys talking about tomorrow?
We have a interesting question that we're going to be talking about whether or not, like there's the phrase, is Linux ready to dominate the desktop? And that's not what we're going to be answering, because we're going to outright state that Linux is ready to dominate the desktop. And we're going to explain why and what our opinions are. Also, we're going to be talking about very likely, he kind of implied that we might not, but there was this thing about Tim Sweeney doing some tweets, and they're not ideal. And Ryan said, "Hey, you know how you don't like talking about Tim Sweeney? Yeah, we're gonna do that." So apparently, we're gonna do that.
It's awesome, and I'm sure there's gonna be the typical banter, and Jill will keep you all the children in line. As it normally
that's
goes,
a requirement.
Right?
That's what we need Jill for, to keep us in check, because otherwise it's just chaos.
I love it. And there's 30% more Jill. Is that what it is, or is it 33% more Jill?
33% more Jill.
33% more Jill. I almost shorted her a 3%. That's terrible on me. and then so Linux user space is coming out Monday, and it's the big review of MX Linux.
Yep.
So is that one of the 2-hour shows? Or is that going to be
Well, I mean, that was a joke that, we get almost to 2 hours. And I think this one was close. We actually had a couple of feedback items, and I think we sort of trimmed some of those back and decided to hold those for either a separate release or something like that, because we wanted to trim it down a little bit. But it's still an hour and 40-ish minutes, probably. So it's a kind of a long one, but definitely we dive into the history and really we give our feedback on it. And as always, we also have an app focus.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe do like a user space extras or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, honestly. And I know we're pitching stuff here for folks, but seriously, if you haven't checked out Linux User Space, it's an excellent, conversation between two people that are very into what they're talking about. And it an hour and 40 sounds like, oh my goodness, it really doesn't feel like it's a great flow of conversation. So
it didn't feel like that when we were doing it, I can tell you that.
Well, the final product makes it seem that way. So maybe it's smoke and mirrors, but you're doing a good
Leo
job.
needs to be more excitable, I swear.
An hour and 40 isn't all that bad. I think the longest podcast I have for this week is 4 hours.
Oh my goodness.
That's a long podcast. That's not a podcast. That's basically that's
a mini series.
Yeah, that's basically 4 episodes of a TV show. Yeah, or 2.
Wow.
No, that is a pretty accurately close to the Zack Snyder cut. So that we're gonna just refer to everything as a Zack Snyder cut when it's that ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know what that's in reference to, but
Justice League Snyder cut on HBO Max. It's a 4-hour movie. It's longer than Braveheart.
Seem like it.
Longer than Braveheart. It's longer than The Irishman.
Exactly.
I haven't gotten any streaming service since 2018. I think was the last time I had it.
Yeah, you're not missing much, really. If I'm being completely honest with you. Besides bills.
I've got my audio described Star Wars collection. I'm good.
Nice. So Nate, is there a new show on the Destination Linux Network?
Kind of. It's more like they took a show, put it in the paint booth, and let Wendy recolor it. No, I'm just kidding. It's DLN Extend is now Linux Out Loud, and we have our logo contest is being voted on now. And once that's done, we're going to do the Linux Saloon logo contest. So there's that. But we're really excited because we're going to talk about because the Steam Deck has been getting released to some people, and so we have some comments and such on that, and we're all very excited. Well, Matt and I are very excited. I think Wendy's a little lesser excited about it, but it's a good conversation that we're having, and how we are going to potentially use the Steam Deck. So it was a fun talk for sure. And I know that Rick, you do a stream on Wednesday. I want to make sure that people know that. And also Mark, you have your Linux users group. I want people to also know about that as well. So if you would put a link in
I did actually, when we were talking about the ALE, I put a link in. So
okay. Good.
ALE.org for Linux enthusiasts. Linux enthusiasts.
So I just like to make sure, after after the saloon closes down, that we have places we can meet elsewhere throughout the week. So that's important to me. And then I have a nonsense at cubiclenate.com, but
we love your nonsense.
So I guess I do want to thank you all for being a part of the conversation in both the Zoom meeting as well as the YouTube stream, and everyone watching the show after the fact. I want to thank everyone involved for making Linux and open source tools possible for us to not only have this conversation, but also to have fun and enjoy our technology. Linux truly puts personal back into personal computers. And that's why I like Linux, actually. So thank you for stopping by. Be sure to tip your developers, and always, please remember to Linux responsibly. Until next time, see yous.
Bye.
I still love that.
Bye.
Thank you, Michael.
Toodles. See yous. Michael, save the day.
Bye.
At least I was here. I could
That's pseudo responsibly.